Office, RCO, is a state agency led by a governor-appointed director. These programs we are discussing today are overseen by the Recreation and Conservation Funding Board, which is made up of 5 citizen members and 3 state agency members listed here. And our RCO Director, Megan Duffy, will now say a few words.
Good morning, everybody. Great to have you here. Thanks for coming. We're thrilled that you're here to learn more about our grant programs, and hopefully we see a lot of fabulous applications coming in over the course of the year. And good luck to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Duffy. Today, we will have a total of 4 webinars covering our spring cycle of grant opportunities. This 9 a.m. webinar is to talk about our parks programs. Please tune in to any of the sessions that are of interest to you. Afterwards, we will also post the recordings and slides for each session on our website. Our agenda today, we'll do a quick introduction to RCO, then move on to the specific programs covering what is new, a little bit about our online application and grant management system, and then save some time for questions. Our grants managers, Russell Malberg, Lon Nikolai, and I will be presenting today. Carl Jacobs, one of our senior grants managers, will be handling the question and answer portion at the end. To get us started, I'd like to ask that you please hold your questions till the end, since we want to get through all of the information, and we might answer your questions during the webinar. I also want to note that we won't have time today to answer detailed project-specific questions, so please reach out to your grants manager in the upcoming days and weeks for assistance. Today, we can field the higher-level questions about the grant programs, categories, processes, and eligibility. So if you have those high-level questions today, you can type them into the Q&A, and we will address them at the end of the webinar. Now for the general overview. At RCO, we have 2 sections that award grants, the Recreation and Conservation section and the Salmon Recovery section. We do a lot. On the Recreation and Conservation side, we have 15 grant programs, and some of those have subcategories and programs, which together amount to about 40 grant opportunities with varying goals. So today we'll be talking about ALEA, the Aquatic Lands Enhancement Account, Boating Infrastructure Grants, which is also known as BIG or BIG, Washington Wildlife and Recreation Program, WWRP, and the Youth Athletic Facilities, YAF. We have a lot of ground to cover. In general terms, our grants provide funding for outdoor recreation. These can be ball fields, outdoor sport courts, playgrounds, skate parks, pump tracks, splash pads, the list goes on. RCO grants can also fund the associated support facilities like parking lots and restrooms. RCO can fund trails, whether it's a regional trail connecting trail systems throughout a park or town. We also have a backcountry trail programs that are offered later this fall. Habitat areas, there's funding for acquiring property for critical habitat or natural areas near urban centers. And we also have programs for acquiring farmland and forest land, as well as community forests. There's a separate session for that later this afternoon. Water access can include swim beaches, non-motorized water recreation facilities like kayak and canoe launches, for example. It's all about getting people down to the water. And then there's motorized boating. The boating infrastructure grants provide funding for facilities targeting large motorized boats over 26 feet in length. We also have another program for smaller motorized boating facilities for docks, ramps that are included in our application round this fall. Within our various grant programs, the types of projects eligible for RCO funding include acquisitions, development of facilities, combinations, and restoration projects, depending on the grant categories. Similarly, we have eligible applicants in general, but not every applicant type is eligible for every program. Please refer to the RCO website, which we'll go over later, and the grant manuals for the particular programs to verify eligibility. So applications open today. So let's take a high look at our key application steps. It's important to understand that it is an involved and very competitive process. We start with applications due on May 1st, but that's really just the start. We won't know if your project will receive funding until mid-2025, after the legislature convenes and finalizes the budget for the next biennium. There are quite a few steps in between, and that's what we will talk about today. First things first, you will want to acquaint yourself with the applicable manuals on our website. The new ones for 2024 are available soon and will be posted on the program pages. You'll also want to make sure you're checking on the requirements to apply. So for WWRP, there's a comprehensive outdoor recreation plan requirement, and the plans are good for 6 years. You may already have a current plan on file or one that you can submit. Please contact Nick Norton from our policy team with any questions about this requirement. We also want to mention that all first-time applicants need to submit a legal opinion to RCO by the technical completion deadline. If you've already received a previous RCO grant, this requirement has already been met. And another thing to get started on early is the authorizing resolution, which secures the appropriate authorization for who signs your grant agreement and who signs amendments as applicable. So get started on that early, because depending on your internal routing process, this will need to go to signature by city council, mayor, so get that started soon. And specific to WWRP, we do have a local jurisdiction review and conferral process. You'll want to make sure that you also get started on that early if you're applying within that program. So this sounds like a lot. So how do you navigate this process? Meet the Outdoor Grants Managers team. We are here to help. Each program has its own requirements and nuances, and this is where we come in. You can visit the Contact Us section of our website at any time to find our contact information. And once you start a grant application, you will be assigned to a grant manager. So speaking of grants managers, it's time for me to introduce you to Lon Nikolai. She is here to talk to you about what we're all here for, the money.
Hi, everybody. My name is, thank you, Allison. Okay, my name is Lon Nikolai, and I will be talking about match. Most of our grant programs require applicants to bring in some form of match with their application. The amount of match required depends on the program you are applying for. In your project, there are elements that you want RCO grant to pay for, and there are elements you plan to provide as match. RCO thinks of it as one big project where everything must be eligible to and follow the same rules. In general, local agencies must provide at least 10% of the total project cost in the form of a non-state, non-federal contribution. This does not apply to Native American tribes, and match is not required for state agencies. In some programs, match reduction is available if your project qualifies for one of the match reduction criteria, which we will explore in just a little bit. It's important to note that RCO grant funds are intended to be the last piece of the funding puzzle of a project. You'll need to be able to certify that you have your matching resources in hand before receiving the grant funding. So what counts as match? Your matching sources can be appropriations in cash, bonds, the value of donated real property, the value of your expenses for labor, materials, or equipment, and even other grants, including another RCO grant, as long as it is eligible and not from the same grant program. Speak with your grants manager about your matching sources early so we can make sure it's all eligible. All items being included as match must also be eligible in the program. Let's talk about match reduction. In the local parks, trails, and water access categories of the Washington Wildlife and Recreation Program, as well as the Youth Athletic Facilities Program, some local agencies may qualify for match reduction if they meet any of the match reduction criteria, which are communities in need, underserved populations, counties in need, and federal disaster areas. We will put the link to this page in the chat. I will show you the match reduction mapping tool, and you can find the mapping tool and match reduction information on the website. So here's what the match reduction mapping tool looks like. The information is from the census tract, and you would enter the location of your project, And the map would show if it qualifies for match reduction. You can also zoom in and out to see the different match requirements for different locations. The map we have up here shows that a project located in downtown Vancouver would qualify for match reduction under the underserved populations category, and their required minimum match is 30% instead of 50%. So now that we have a better idea of match, it is time I take you on a journey through our first grant program of the day, the Washington Wildlife and Recreation Program, also known as WWRP. Within the WWRP grant program, there are 3 adventures to choose from. There's outdoor recreation, habitat conservation, and working lands. On this journey, we'll be exploring outdoor recreation. And if you're up for more fun later at 11, our friend and fellow outdoor grants manager, Henry, will be leading another webinar on habitat conservation, while dynamic duo Kim and Andrea will walk you through working lands at 3 o'clock. So back to WWRP outdoor recreation. The intention of this program is to provide grants to purchase land for parks and trails and develop recreation facilities through one of the following categories. First up, we have local parks, and then trails, water access, state lands development, and finally state parks. A comprehensive recreation plan is required for all of the categories mentioned. Now let's dive into the funding behind WWRP. 45% of funds is allocated to the outdoor recreation account, while the other 45% goes to habitat conservation and 10% to working lands. And while we don't know how much money we're going to receive, but just to give you an idea, last biennium, WWRP received about 120 million, which was divided up according to the table shown here. So who can apply in the local parks, trails, and water access categories? That would be local agencies, Native American tribes, and special purpose districts. For trails and water access, state agencies are also eligible to apply. And for all 3 of these categories, virtual presentations are required. And now let's swing over to local parks and see what that category is all about. Local parks, here we are. Grants in this category may be used for acquisition, development, or renovation of parks for both active and passive outdoor recreation. 50% match is required, and match reduction may be possible if your project qualifies. What's new this year? Local parks and youth athletic facilities can no longer match each other. There are also some criteria changes that I will go into later. So we are going to skate through some examples of eligible local parks projects. These include, but aren't limited to, athletic fields, campgrounds, skate parks, sports courts, outdoor swimming pools, playgrounds, pump tracks, as well as supporting facilities and amenities such as picnic shelters, restrooms, and parking. If you can dream it, you can do it as long as it's eligible. Now let's take a walk over to the trails category. If you're looking to purchase, develop, or renovate pedestrian, equestrian, bicycle, or cross-country ski trails, this grant category is for you. The main intent of this category is to fund community recreation trails that provide connections between communities and other trails or provide access to recreational destinations. Eligible projects types are the same as local parks, which are acquisition, development, or renovation and combination projects. There are no grant limits. 50% match is required for local government agencies, and match reduction may be possible if your project qualifies, and match is not required for state agencies. One thing to keep in mind for this category is that trails must be for non-motorized use and cannot be part of a city street or roadway such as a sidewalk. If a trail is part of a roadway, it must be separated from the roadway by a pervious strip of land no less than 10 feet. If less than 10 feet, the trail must be separated from a roadway by at least 3 feet of pervious land as long as a contiguous barrier exists between the roadway and the trail. Some typical projects in this category include trails, benches, tables, signage, parking, site prep, trail surfacing, viewpoints, and restrooms. Now let's paddle on over to the water access category. Water access. This category provides physical access for non-motorized water-related recreational activities. 50% match is required for local government agencies, and match reduction may be possible if your project qualifies. State agencies are not required to provide match. Eligible project types are also acquisition, development, or renovation, and combination projects. The sky's the limit for this category. Applicants can request as much funding as they need to complete their project. It's worth noting that this category has a preference for acquisition projects where 75% of the funds allocated must be used for acquisition costs, meaning meeting this statutory requirement can mean skipping higher rent development projects in favor of acquisition project lower on the list. Let's jump in and see some of the typical water access projects. These include, but aren't limited to, waterfront improvements, beach and river access for non-motorized boating and paddling, fishing, swimming, or just taking a long walk on the beach, supporting facilities such as parking, restrooms, picnic areas, and fishing platforms are also eligible. Next up on our journey is the state lands development category. This category is only available to Department of Fish and Wildlife and Department of Natural Resources. So if you're with DFW or DNR and you're interested in developing or renovating outdoor recreation facilities on existing state recreation land, this one is for you. You may request between $25,000 to $325,000. Some of the typical projects in this category include campgrounds, fishing piers and platforms, launch ramps and floats, paths and trails for non-motorized use, viewpoints, and support facilities. Last but not least, in WWRP, we have the state parks category. And you guessed it, the only eligible applicants is Washington State Parks. This category provides funding for the acquisition and development of active and passive outdoor recreation opportunities at our beautiful state parks, such as campgrounds, cabins, picnic areas, and trails. Here we are. We have made it to youth athletic facilities, and it is going to be a ball, and I will tell you why. First, let's get into how funding works for this category. So youth athletic facilities, also known as YAF, has two categories, large and small. 10% of funds is allocated to the small category, and if the category is undersubscribed, the rest of the funds will go to the large category. And even though we don't know how much money we're going to receive this biennium, to give you an idea, the last biennium, we received $10.4 million. So let's get to know YAF a little bit. YAF provides funds to develop and renovate outdoor athletic facilities serving youth, and you can apply if you're a city, county, park district, Native American tribe, or a qualified nonprofit. Project types include acquisition, development, and combination projects. YAF's priority is to enhance facilities that serve youth through the age of 18 who participate in sports and athletics. This program is not for typical park elements such as playgrounds. It is for outdoor athletic facilities used for playing competitive sports. So I'm going to kick off with the small category. YAF Small is for lower cost projects in smaller communities. Applicants may submit standalone accessibility improvement projects with no inbound elements required. And new this year, the maximum grant limit has been increased to $350,000, and the maximum total project cost is now $700,000. Now, what is considered a small community? Well, that would be a city or park district with 10,000 residents or less, or a county with no more than 60,000 residents. For the large category, new this year, acquisition-only projects are eligible, and the maximum grant limit is now $1.5 million. A community of any size can apply in the large category. Again, new this year, YF grants may not be used to satisfy match in the WWRP local parks category. Some of the eligible projects that may hit a home run in this category include athletic facilities, sport fields, field turf, skating facilities, sports courts, pump tracks, outdoor swimming pools, and finally, other supporting amenities such as irrigation, restrooms, scoreboards, field lighting, and parking can also be included. Moving on to the evaluation criteria changes this year. These changes apply to the above listed programs, and they reflect priorities highlighted in the 2023 Washington State Recreation and Conservation Plan and the 2022 Equity Review of Grant Programs. The changes include adding an unscored project introduction section, revising the need criterion to include 3 RCO score metrics. Project scope and design now work together to replace elements that were addressed by need satisfaction. Project support is now project engagement, and expansion and renovation has been eliminated from WWRP local parks and water access. There's going to be another webinar that explains these changes in greater detail on April 24th, and we will put the link to that in the chat. Well, my journey with you all ends here. Now my co-star Russell is going to take you on a slightly different adventure, and I know he's going to hit it out of the park.
Thank you, Lon. Before I dive into some aquatic grant opportunities, I wanted to briefly mention 2 other programs that have some similarities to the ones Lon just talked about. First is the Land and Water Conservation Fund, or LWCF. If you're interested in this program, float on back at 1 p.m. for a separate webinar. I also wanted to briefly mention our newest program, the Community Outdoor Athletic Facilities Program, or COAF. This program is uniquely focused on helping support meaningful athletic experiences in communities that lack recreational opportunities, have underserved populations, and possess limited financial capacity. For more information on this program, visit the COAF webpage, where you can find a recording of the webinar from January when the pre-application period began. Please note that pre-applications are due March 13th. I know it's the middle of winter, but maybe you're dreaming of being out on the water. Maybe you've got a vision of a new kayak launch or renovating a boardwalk. The Aquatic Lands Enhancement Account program might be just what you're looking for. The purpose of the ALEA program is to improve access to navigable bodies of water. This program provides funding up to $1 million for acquisition projects, $500,000 for restoration, renovation, or development projects, and $1 million for combination projects. Sponsors are required to bring at least 50% matching funds, but a long-range or comprehensive plan is not required for this program. In addition to updated evaluation criteria that Lon just talked about, ALEA has also adopted a new cost increase policy. While this does allow for requests of small increases during extenuating circumstances, it's important to create a budget that will comfortably get your project done in the time frame in the grant program. This program is available to cities, towns, counties, native tribes, state agencies, and special purpose districts. Typical projects include restoring shoreline habitats for salmon, creating a waterfront park, removing bulkheads to restore natural beach functions, restoring an estuary, and replacing boardwalks. However, ALEA is not an eligible program for things like concession buildings, offices, shops, fish production facilities, and routine maintenance costs. Maybe you have your sights set on something bigger. More specifically, you have a facility that specializes in vessels that are 26 feet or longer. The Boating Infrastructure Grant Program is a federally funded program administered by RCO for facilities that target transient recreational boats that travel and stay for up to 15 days. This program is open to applications from cities, towns, counties, native tribes, special purpose districts, state agencies, qualified nonprofits, and private marina operators. The sponsor match must be at least 25%, and bonus points are given if more matching funds are brought to the table. The BIG program is split into 2 categories, Tier 1 and Tier 2. Tier 1 applications are evaluated by a state committee and come from a statewide funding pool of about $300,000. Projects can be for maintenance, development, or restoration. Tier 2 applications are evaluated by a national review panel and allow for a maximum request of a little over $1.4 million. These projects can be development or renovation with some maintenance aspects, but not standalone maintenance projects. It's important to note that due to the program being federally funded, there may be some additional documents required, unique nuances to the grant manual, and a grant schedule that might not align with our other programs. Typical projects include the development or renovation of guest moorage floats, boarding floats, fixed docks and piers, navigational aids and buoys, breakwaters, and even upland support facilities like bathrooms, showers, and utilities. However, the BIG program is not eligible to fund things like tie-up slips for stays that are over 15 days, infrastructure such as launches for trailered or car-top boats that are under 26 feet long, land acquisition, planning costs, or dredging costs that exceed $200,000. So now that you've found out which program you'd like to apply for, I want to give you some tips. Get familiar with the RCO website. You'll be using this site as a reference quite often and to log into Prism, which we'll talk about shortly. Start your application soon. Even if you aren't ready to complete your application for submission now, this will get the process started and it will get you assigned to a grants manager. Read manuals and all resources closely. Don't let them intimidate you, embrace them. They're meant to answer most of the questions that you might have about the process. Communicate with your grants manager. If there's a question about eligibility, applications, billings, you name it, we get asked it. We're here to help. Focus on the evaluation criteria. Evaluators will be using the same criteria to score all applications in a particular program. You'll want to make sure that you have your focus on answering the right questions that they might be thinking. And prepare for your presentation. Several RCO programs have a live virtual presentation requirement as part of the evaluation process. We have resources to help you prepare, including recordings from previous years. And remember, practice makes perfect. While there's a plethora of information on our website, I wanted to focus on 2 useful paths that you can take from our main page. The first one is to find out information about a specific program. You can hover over the word grants towards the top of the page or click on Find a Grant down towards the middle. The second is our project search tool, which can be found on the top banner towards the right-hand side. Each of our grant programs has a page dedicated to it that will look something like this. We continue to update these pages as our programs evolve, so it's the best place for up-to-date information. As you scroll through the page, you'll find several important resources. The grant application schedule has the important dates that lead you from today all the way through eventual funding of projects. On the right side are several important documents, none more important than the grant manual. It can answer almost any question you might have about the program and also has a section on evaluation criteria, which should always be your focus. A little further down, you'll see the applicant's to-do list, which is an itemized list of requirements to complete throughout the process. If you're like me and you'd love to keep a list handy, this is a great way to stay on track. Lastly, I want to point out the grant award history section. This is where you can find the results of the grant program from the previous cycles. You can click on any of the PDF links you'd like, and it'll open up something that looks like this. Remember the WWRP local parks program that Lon introduced you to? Here's the rank list from last cycle. This shows the funded and unfunded applications in ranked order. You can see a breakdown of the scoring criteria, which can be useful for several different ways. For example, let's say you're thinking about bringing a skate park to your community, but you aren't sure if that's typically something that's competitive in that program. Oops, excuse me. Just by looking at the project names on the first page, you can see 3 examples that have the word skate park in the title. Shout out to those in Seattle, Westport, and Cathlamet. Way to go. Now, you may want to dig a little deeper and use the project search tool. Here, you can find information about current or past RCO funded projects. You'll be able to search by location, organization, and a variety of other criteria. You'll also be able to select a few different ways in which to show your results. This can be useful for finding similar projects in your area from the same grant program or other research techniques you might be using to prepare. Let's continue to search for skate parks. I updated the criteria to show projects that are currently in progress, funded at least in part by the local parks program, and that come up using the keyword skate. I also selected the results to be in list form because, as I mentioned, they're kind of my thing. If you see one that piques your interests, it also allows you to link directly to what we call the project snapshot, which will look something like this. A project snapshot is a one-stop shop for the details on a particular project. It will show you a project's description, funding sources, timeline of milestones, and much more. If you're interested in learning more about a particular project, looking for a colleague that may have a similar project to the one you're envisioning, or just looking for inspiration, use this tool. Again, if you have any higher level questions about the programs or processes that we talked about, go ahead and add them to the Q&A portion. We will take a moment at the end to answer some of the common ones that come up between now and then. Remember, if your question is something very specific about a project, it's best to reach out to your grants manager. Now, Allison, back to you.
Thank you, Russell. So now it's time to jump back into the application process, and we couldn't do that without mentioning RCO's online application system called Prism. You will find the Prism login link at the top of our webpage, and we have specific instructions there too if you need some help setting up a new account. And we should note Prism Online works best with the browsers of Edge, Chrome, Firefox, or Safari. From there, to start an application, you'll click on the orange box on the top left that says New Application. The next page will open, asking you for information about your organization, program, project name. So depending on what type of application you've decided to submit, you will choose the type of program from the drop-down menu and follow the prompts from there. Once your application has been started, this is what it will look like. I wanted to point out the application navigation tree on the left. This shows that a lot of information is needed to complete an application, so it's important to start this early. You can also use this feature to click between pages within the application. The next button will auto-save each time it's clicked, and this function will allow you to exit and come back to your application anytime without losing data. So moving on to project evaluation. There are two types of project evaluation: in-person, virtual presentation, and written. For both, you will submit a Prism online application and the required attachments. Then, if you are applying for a grant program that requires a presentation, you will present a PowerPoint that addresses the evaluation criteria located in our grant manuals. If your grant program requires a written evaluation, like YAF or BIG, for example, you will submit written answers to the evaluation criteria through Prism with your application. Each grant program has its own evaluation criteria listed in Section 4 of that program's manual. Make sure you're referencing the new 2024 manuals that will be the latest and greatest information. Those will be posted to our website soon. And that also includes any of the criteria changes that Lon mentioned earlier. So please review this criteria often while working on your application. It's really key to the funding of your project. And I do want to mention to people that have applied in the past, it's important not to just use the same PowerPoint or materials that you've used in previous cycles due to this reason, that there have been criteria changes and you want to make sure everything aligns with that new information in the manual. Something that's helpful for applicants is an opportunity for you to share your project with the evaluators who will ultimately score your project ahead of time, ahead of the final presentation or written application. This is called technical review. While it's not mandatory, it provides you an opportunity to hear from evaluators if they have significant concerns about your project or questions, and it also provides you a chance to correct any issues based on their feedback. After technical review, you can still change anything about your project, including your budget, project scope, etc. Then in July, you'll be required to resubmit all of your materials, and after that, everything is final and no changes are allowed. After that final submission, you'll have a final in-person virtual presentation for most of our categories. At that time, our evaluators will score your project. For those in-person virtual presentations, you will be required to deliver your presentation via Zoom from anywhere that has a good internet connection. Depending on the grant program, you will have between 10 to 20 minutes to deliver your presentation, time for questions at the end. We will notify you when it's time to sign up for a slot for both technical review and the final evaluations. However, the dates for these presentations are already identified on our webpage, so make sure you block them out on your calendar now. Now for just some additional considerations as you're formulating your application. Control and tenure. So an important consideration is having those minimum requirements for owning the underlying land for development projects. Those specifics are located in Manual 4 and will provide details about ownership, lease, easement, or another instrument that would be allowed through our programs. And specific to acquisition projects, we have a waiver of retroactivity. And I want to mention that because that's important for acquisitions. This process allows advanced approval from RCO to purchase property without a project agreement, and that preserves the eligibility of the land and other incidental costs for reimbursement. The waiver remains viable for 2 grant cycles, and it also applies to donated land you might want to use as match. So to request this waiver, you must do so in writing prior to closing on the property. That's a very important piece of it. And the request must include why it's critical to act now to secure the property rather than waiting until the grant funds become available. Please check out our acquisition toolkit on our website for more details on that. Cultural resources. So Governor's Executive Order 21-02 required review for potential impact to cultural resources. So RCO will review and share information with the Department of Archaeological and Historic Preservation, DAP, and tribes. There might be further requirements in your agreement if you are funded, and that often will include hiring a consultant to complete cultural resources report for the area of potential effect for your project. So it's important to keep a close eye on that and know to expect that and budget for it in your project. You're required to comply with all these RCO conditions before starting work and before we issue your notice to proceed to break ground. There are additional resources on our website, including an instructional video on these specifics. Another important consideration when developing your project scope and budget is designing your facility to be barrier-free and accessible to all. Our agency has a commitment to making developed sites open and accessible to the greatest extent possible. It's much easier and more cost-effective to incorporate these considerations early rather than through change orders or contract amendments. We do have several resources again on our website to help make your project accessible. However, things to consider are playground surfacing types, pathways of travel, parking areas, and viewing pads for sports fields, to name a few. And project budget and scoping your project. So first, you'll want to provide an accurate cost estimate for your proposal. This is really the foundation for your grant funding request, evaluation, and ultimately the approved amount for your successful award. So it's very important to consider as much as possible the project feasibility and your permit requirements, fiscal requirements such as paying prevailing wages and using competition, and also planning for inflation, since grant awards will not be made until July of 2025, and it's reasonable to assume that your construction won't start till 2026. So it can take some time to get the grant agreements issued and making sure that you're meeting all of the special conditions and cultural resources requirements in advance. And note that most grant programs do not allow for cost increases, and in those that do, they are rare. So it's important to plan upfront and not rely on additional assistance from the grant program. Be realistic. Project implementation. So projects should be ready to implement upon funding for this grant cycle. That will be July 2025 at the earliest. Do not start until there's an executed agreement and you've completed cultural resources review and have environmental clearance. You will be asked to establish project timelines, or what we call milestones, and we generally expect projects to be completed within 2 to 3 years. Please note that we do have some eligible pre-agreement costs. Those include design, engineering, and permitting, and are valid up to 3 years from your agreement date. So if you're starting some of that work now, make sure you keep track so you can submit for reimbursement later if you're awarded a grant. Please see our manuals for more information on this. And just for a little bit of the project implementation. So if you are successful in attaining a grant, we do have separate trainings for successful applicants, but just make sure that you're aware that RCO pays on a reimbursement basis only. So plan for that in advance, and knowing that we ask that you submit a bill at least annually, or you can do it more frequently if you wish. We have you submit regular progress reports, and we expect that you keep meticulous records if you are funded. And RCO's responsibility is to protect our public investment. So grants are for the long term. And if this project is an acquisition, a deed of right must be recorded prior to final reimbursement. And for development or restoration projects, the site must remain open and available to the public, generally for perpetuity, which is forever. So there are a few exceptions to this rule, mostly in the YAF program or BIG, where the compliance window is shorter or based on useful life. But for most of our programs, that is the perpetuity requirement. So we do recommend strongly that you look at Manual 7 for long-term obligations, so you have an understanding of these responsibilities. So thank you so much for listening in today. As a reminder, we will be posting both the slides and a recording of this presentation to our website in the next few days. And as I mentioned, please do make sure that you're using the most up-to-date 2024 manuals, which will be uploaded to our website soon. So now we will go to the question and answer segment to see what questions we can answer right now. I'm having Carl Jacobs, again, he's one of our senior grants managers, take the lead in reading and responding to some of the questions that have come up. Carl, take it away.
Thanks, you guys. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I have been busily trying to answer the questions as they're rolling in, and I think I've hit most of them. So if you do have another question, go ahead and put that in there. I will, it sounds like they appreciate the puns. Me too. Nice job, you guys, putting this presentation together. That was fun. Good information and kept it lively. So I'm just going to scroll back through some of the questions already answered because other folks may have some of those same questions. There were a few questions about the YAF 10,000 population limit. That limit is only for the small grants category. So in terms of what's eligible, the types of projects, is no change. That just means the community that can qualify for the small grant category. Let me see. A question about trails, asking about planning and design costs. And those would be eligible as part of a development grant, but unfortunately we do not do in the trails category a planning or design only grant. So it would be a development grant, but you could include your site specific design and engineering and permitting costs. We do have another trails grant in the fall, our NOVA program that does allow planning grants. It's a little bit different eligibility in terms of the project location, but depending upon your site, those are generally for a little more remote backcountry type trails. But depending on your location, it may qualify for NOVA. So you can take a look at that. Question about boat ramps in our water access category. And unfortunately, no, that category is only allows non-motorized boating activities. And so but again, we have other grant programs coming in the fall. And so I mentioned NOVA. Another one is our BFP, or Boating Facilities Program. That program is all about motorized boating activities. So if you do have a motorized launch, moorage, buoy, something like that, please take a look. The information's out on our website. And in August, we'll be having webinars for our fall grant programs. I think Prism will open in September. Applications will be due in early November. Question about the authorizing resolution. If you might be applying for multiple grants, yes, we do need a resolution for each of your applications. However, they can be bundled. So you can go to your city council, your county commissioners. When they adopt that resolution, you can include multiple applications on a single resolution. Let's see, scrolling here. Oh, there are some new questions rolling in. Hold on, let me get down through these other ones. Will the webinar be posted online? Yes, we're going to post a link. We will post the live recording as well. I think is just a static slide deck. If you don't want, so you'll have access to both. Another question, why after the $1.5 million maximum? That's a new grant limit, just in general for all project types, not limited to acquisition only. That's in our large grant category. If you already own the land and you're going to develop it, can you use that land as match? And the answer is no. If it's already owned, it is not eligible. If it's property you don't own yet, or maybe you're acquiring under a waiver of retroactivity, that could be used as match for a development project. And what you do is submit an application for what we call a combination project. So it would include both the acquisition and the development component. But if you already own it, it is not eligible. Someone has an opportunity to buy 500 acres on the Columbia River. That is pretty spectacular. Asking about the best grant programs. Reach out to your grant manager to talk about that. It likely, something like local parks or water access, but it could be a mix. That's an awfully large site, so it could be a mix of programs, maybe some of our conservation programs for a portion of the property. So just reach out to your grant manager to talk about some of those options. And it really depends on what you intend to develop or how you plan to use the property. Question about the deadline and making revisions. So just to clarify, May 1st, you have to get your complete application in the door, but we do have what we call our technical review period. So we're going to review it. We're going to give you feedback. You're going to get feedback from the evaluation committees. You'll have an opportunity to do essentially a practice run for your PowerPoint evaluation. Then we're going to return the application to you, and you'll have time to revise it, tune it up, and resubmit it by what we call technical completion deadline. So keep an eye on the calendar schedule. Question about budgeting for cultural resources. Typically about $10,000. That is a good rule of thumb in most cases, unless you happen to know you have a particularly sensitive or complicated site, you may want to budget more, up to maybe $20,000. Here's one. Oh, Allison, you answered that. Thank you. Allison jumped in there to help with the Q&A. There was just another question about deadlines and construction timing. Deadline to apply again, May 1st. Prism should be open today or in the next few days if it isn't already. So you can get in there and start working on your application. All right, and then a few more questions have rolled in. Let's see, can we submit a recreation plan to be reviewed to ensure specific criteria? Yes, if you, that's the basic planning eligibility requirement. We started reaching out to folks last year, so hopefully you're eligible or have a plan ready to go. You can reach out to Nick Norton, our planning specialist, to talk about that. We may already have your plan on file. You may already have an adopted plan that you just haven't turned in for us to review. So yeah, take a look. On our website, we also have a list of communities for which we already have your plan on file and have established eligibility. So you can take a look to see if you're good to go. If not, definitely reach out right away to Nick or your grant manager, and we can take a look at your plan and make sure you are eligible in this grant run. Question about, let's see, special requirements that would not apply to federally recognized tribes for a trail grant. The trail would be on tribal trust land. Honestly, just not sure right off the cuff here. So sounds like some good questions, maybe some complicated control and tenure there if it's on tribal trust land. So you want to reach out to your grant manager and start that conversation early so we can figure out what hopefully something that would be eligible and what we're going to need to ensure that it's eligible. Another question about large grant category can only be used for acquisitions in YAF, but that's, no, it's just so large grants and small grants can pay for all the same project types and things are eligible. It's just a difference in the size of the community for which you're eligible to apply. And the small grant category, it's both really a small grant, but it's also a small project and a small community. So really it's just for smaller communities, so they have an opportunity to get a slice of the money. Did you hear that ALEA grants require a match even for state agencies? Yes, ALEA, everybody must provide match, including state agencies. That is not the case in WWRP. State agencies do not have to provide match. Dog parks eligible? Yes, they are eligible. Please define qualified nonprofit. There's several criteria, 4 or 5 criteria. I don't remember them all off the top of my head. So pop open the manual and take a look. But it's essentially that you've been active in that particular activity. So I think maybe you're talking about YAF, but you've been active for at least 3 years in these kinds of activities. You have bylaws and you don't discriminate and all that standard stuff. You're incorporated with the state of Washington. But take a look at the details. They're listed also on our to-do list. So the to-do lists and in the manuals. Let's see. I think that's about it. Do you guys see any others in the list that we may have missed?
The long-term plan submitted by March 1st.
Yeah. Or approved to you. I think it needs to be submitted by March 1st. I believe, or do we say approve? I think submitted and then
Long-term.
But this is the long-term, your 6-year Parks and Rec plan, your PROS plan, it could be it could be like an individual element, like just a trails plan. That would be okay as well if you're applying in trails. And then our Nick, our planning specialist, is going to take a look at that.
Our extensions available.
Yeah, we can offer a limited time extension on those to establish planning eligibility. If you're usually that means if you're wrapping up your plan and you're nearing adoption and you're getting to your city council, say in mid-March, we can give you a short extension to make that happen. But get that request into us right away prior to that March 1st deadline. Right, anything else that I've missed? We put in the chat, I think you all can see the chat. We've been putting lots of links to website. I know we can't see anything you write in the chat. That's why we're using the Q&A, but I think you can see the chat. There's lots of useful, helpful links in there. Take a look at that. Let's see, would a project scheduled to begin construction August 2025 and complete before the end of 25 be eligible? Yes. Well, very, very likely. I'll say that. So we should have our budget next year, which is effective July 1. Now, occasionally the legislature doesn't get done in time and the budget is delayed, but generally, most years that budget is adopted, it is effective July 1. Our board takes an action to adopt all the ranked lists. So if you're within funding range, yes, we could be writing you a grant agreement in July. So if you're going to construction in August, that should work. It does, however, mean that you're probably, early 2025, before you have a grant, you're probably starting, maybe even this year, starting your design, your engineering work, your permitting. And that is okay, but just be aware that is at your own risk. It does become an eligible cost if you're funded, all those A&E costs. But you'll be sort of floating that in the meantime until you get a grant. All right, I think we got through all the Q&As. Anything else? We had a lot of folks on this webinar. Thank you so much for joining us. Glad you're interested. Yeah, again, reach out when you start your application in Prism. Within a day or two, your grant manager will be assigned, and so you'll know exactly who you're working with. If in the meantime you have questions, go out on our website, contact us, scroll through, reach out to, try to find a grant manager. You can reach out to any of us and then we'll help you get to the right person. Please post the maximum grant funds for trails. Trails category and water access, there is no maximum grant request. So you can ask for as much as you need, but there is still the matching requirement, the one-to-one match. Let's see. Oh, your design is almost complete. Construction begin. Oh, here's another. I don't know if it's the same one about starting construction. So design is almost complete. Construction is scheduled to begin April 2025. Will that work? No, because April is before we're going to have funding and be able to write you a grant agreement. And construction activities started before a grant are not eligible. So great question. You can start, like I mentioned, your A&E, your design, your permitting, but you cannot start any ground disturbing activities until you have a grant agreement in place, which should be July. That will be the earliest. If the budget, for whatever reason, is delayed, then our ability to write those grant contracts will also be delayed. Webinar sent as a recording. Yes, this is going to be posted on our website, the recording, as well as just the slide deck. Right, let's see. Not seeing any more questions. Thanks again. Do you guys have any final thoughts, clarifications, things we want to? Yeah, well, I guess we'll wrap up. There are 3 more webinars today, one at 11 for our conservation grants, 1 o'clock for Land and Water Conservation Fund, and 3 o'clock for working lands. If you have interest or maybe potential projects, please tune in if you can. But again, also those will also be posted out on our website. So awesome. Thanks so much to our grant managers that presented this morning. Great job. And again, thanks for joining us. We appreciate it. Reach out with questions. We are here to help. Bye, everyone.